Hello, I'm John Michael Bailey, and this is the Wellspring Digital Chat, where we bring marketing brains directly to you. So today we have an extra special guest. We're gonna go down the research and UX path a little bit, and we're gonna dive into the brains of the generation, the one that is getting talked about more and more, Generation Z. And I have a foremost expert on Generation Z here who just wrote a new book called Instabrain, which you should definitely pick up. Sarah, can you go ahead and introduce yourself to these great people?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sarah Weise, and I run a market research company. And we do market research and UX research, and I'm just so excited to be here.
That's awesome. I'm so glad you're here because I truly did just love your book. I learned so much. Yeah, Generation Z makes a lot more sense to me now.
And you were talking about brains. And I was like, hey, I got one on the cover.
There you go.
Here's a
There
brain.
you go. It's all tying in. It's all working out. I love it.
How about that?
So, I thought I knew what Generation Z was all about. I was dead wrong. I assumed they were just like millennials. Not the case at all. So I just wanted to dive in with a stat from your book that I found interesting. It was Gen Z is 2 to 3 times more likely to be influenced by a brand's engagement on social media than by sales. So can you talk a little bit more about the difference, say, between Gen Z and their purchasing behavior than millennials and even Gen X?
Yeah, I think it really goes back to how a generation was raised. And so I guess we should back up and say, hey, let's talk about what the different generations are. Maybe we should start there.
Let's do that.
Just in case people don't know the different acronyms and the different letters. So Gen X are in their 40s right now, about 40s, maybe some 50s. Then we get to Gen Y, which is millennials.
Okay.
And they're pretty much in their late 20s and 30s right now.
Right.
And then we've got Gen Z, who's about 13 to 25 today. And then below Gen Z, we've got the Gen Alphas. So those are today's children. And that'll be my next book.
Yeah.
But for the research that went into this book, we were really focusing on Generation Z. And that's really what's amazing about this generation is that they're the largest living generation today.
Wow.
And they make up so much, they hold so much purchase power. And as marketers, we're still caught up in the whole millennial marketing stuff that everyone's talking about. And we've kind of missed this huge up and coming generation. And so we're starting to learn a little bit more about them as they're coming into the workplace. You know, they're in their early 20s. Some of them are in their early 20s now. They're entering the workforce.
Right.
And we're starting to become more aware of this generation, but really they hold $44 billion in direct buying power a year. And that's just wait until they get jobs, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, we're talking about, and if you include all of the purchases that they influence their parents and their families to make, we're talking about more on the lines of $650 billion a year. I mean, it is just an astronomical purchase power that this generation holds and influence over, you know, democratized family spending, I guess you could say. And they're a lot different in how they shop and transact and consume things online and your marketing online than millennials were. And to get to your point, I will answer your question, I promise.
No, this is great.
But to get to that, I think you have to understand, you have to take a step back and say, how were they raised to begin with? Let's look at a few key differences in how they were brought up so that we can understand why they are kind of doing the things that they're doing now. So there's a few key differences in how they were raised. And the first one is that there was a big shift in parenting styles. So when we think of millennials, we think of like helicopter parents or tiger parents, parents that did everything for them. Well, with Gen Z, who's really only a few years younger than just a couple more years younger than the youngest millennials, there was a huge shift in parenting styles. And instead of doing things for their kids, they actually taught their kids how to do things for themselves online. And so this new type of parenting is called tech parenting. And because of this tech parenting, kids grew up learning how to be way more independent, how to find things out on their own, how to do their own research online and not rely on their parents. But their parents also did this one really interesting thing because in addition to teaching them how to do everything for themselves online, they scared them shitless about everything that could possibly go wrong. And like, that's everything from like online, predators to identity theft and
bullying,
everything in between. I mean, this generation, they are way more independent than millennials, but they're also much more risk averse, which is really interesting. And they are not as influenced by like what you would call salesy promotions. They're like, ooh, is that real? And they are much more critical of what's real, what's authentic, what feels like marketing to them. They're not for that.
That's actually a great segue into my next question, because one of my favorite parts of your book was when you were doing the in-person studies and you were watching these Gen Zs, spend time on their phones, and they would just zip through, their feed and constantly just zipping through, and you're like, what are they doing? They're just flying through it. And then finally something caught their eye. And I wanted to see if you could, and I think what people miss about this is they think they need to have catchy visuals, but I wanted to kind of see if you could go a little bit deeper in that for this and talk about the importance of visuals, the quality of those visuals, and what those visuals are to this generation.
Yeah. So I think when we consider young people and we watch them, even just kids, like maybe your own kids or some kid that or somebody's friend's kid or whatever, you're watching them on their phones and they're just scrolling. And they're doing this at such a crazy rate. This is what's going on. So they have been exposed to images and scrolling things since the time they were very, very young. And so their brains have actually rewired to process more information faster. And so, whereas millennials had about this also affects attention span. So millennials had about a 12-second attention span. Gen Z has an 7 to 8 second attention span. So what's going on is you have to catch their attention super quick. And that's not even like just the visual that has to catch their initial attention has to be, it's nanoseconds. I mean, it's teeny tiny little moments in time. And then once you click it, you've got about 7 to 8 seconds to really like hook them and get them intrigued. But here's the thing, once they get intrigued, like once they do get hooked, they have this superpower and they can hyper focus for hours and days at a time. So I like to tell this story of this one girl that we were interviewing. She was telling us how she was scrolling through Instagram one day and she comes across, she's 13, she comes across this picture of a pet hedgehog, and she goes to her mother and she's like, hey, and I mean immediately it just snapped judgment. She was like, I want a pet hedgehog. She goes to her mother and she's like, hey, can we get a pet hedgehog, Mom? And her mother's like, absolutely not. Like, A, they're wild animals, that's not a pet, and B, aren't they nocturnal? Like they're gonna be sleeping while you're awake. You're never even gonna see this animal in action. And then C, the mother says, aren't they spiky? Like they're not some cute cuddly thing. No, you're not getting a pet hedgehog. And the mother thinks this is over, but this 13-year-old girl, she goes back and she deep dives for about a week, every spare moment on pet hedgehog. She watches all the videos on YouTube. She scours Instagram and I mean everything in between. And she's on the mission to learn everything she can about pet hedgehog ownership and everything that's involved. And so about a week later, when she goes back to her mother, she says, hey mom, I've been thinking about that pet hedgehog. Can we get a pet hedgehog? And the mother says no again. She has a response for every single argument that the mother throws at her. And finally, her mother breaks down. She's like, okay, fine. How much is a pet hedgehog? And the girl says about $500 because you need to get the hedgehog and the cage and the food and like everything else. And she said, okay, great. If you can raise $500, because this is a 13-year-old and no job, if you can raise $500, go ahead, you can buy your pet hedgehog.
Right.
Thinking that this is never going to happen.
Right.
And the girl suddenly goes to YouTube and then is on a second mission to make money from home. So she starts watching all sorts of videos on how to make money from home. And she comes across a series of videos on making slime. And she's like, oh, I want to make slime. That would be really cool. Well, her mother ends up having these essential oils around the house. So she makes this luxury slime, this scented slime. So it's, like lavender slime,
right.
Eucalyptus slime,
tea
and
tree
orange
slime,
and tea tree, whatever slime. So she's making this luxury slime. She packages it beautifully. And she takes it down to the convenience store that's right across from the high school. And she goes to the manager and she's like, hey, will you stock my slime? And he's like, absolutely not. I'm not going to stock your slime. Well, she goes back to him for a month. Every single day, she badgers this manager. I mean, these kids are persistent and they're entrepreneurial and they're persistent.
Yeah.
And she goes back and she badgers this manager every day until finally he says, okay, fine, I'm going to stock your slime, but it's a trial basis only. And if it doesn't sell, we're done. We're going to try this, but done. Well, he starts selling it and it sells like wildfire. And she ends up within a week, she's made enough money to buy this pet hedgehog. So she buys the pet hedgehog. And then she realizes how much money she's making selling slime. So
her mom is so screwed.
Ends up starting to sell it on Instagram. Now she doesn't even have a website, but she's selling it on Instagram.
Oh my God.
And she's selling this slime. She doesn't even need the convenience store anymore.
Right.
And then she buys the hedgehog.
Cut out the middleman.
And she starts an account for the hedgehog. And now the hedgehog is paid and sponsored, and she's making money on him too. So this is Generation Z in a nutshell. They are, in addition to the parenting styles that were different, there's a couple other things that were raised in a time of war and recession.
Yeah.
So they're more fiscally conservative. They are hungry for work. They're side gig savvy. They are entrepreneurial. 61% want to start their own business instead of going to work for somebody else.
Oh yeah.
So I loved this story because it epitomized everything about Generation Z that our research had shown. I mean, from just being hungry for work, being entrepreneurial, self-starters, persistent, diligent, and also just making snap judgments and just going for it and trying it and seeing if it works. And if it doesn't work, we're going to do something else, but let's just try it and see. I mean, the internet is so open for that.
Yeah.
For trial and error. And that's this environment that these kids have been raised in.
It's so funny. I'm laughing so much because my daughter is right on the edge. She's like 12 and a half. And same deal. I mean, same.
Does she love the Visco girls?
I don't even know.
Wear like the scrunchies around her wrist and carry a Hydro flask.
Yeah, actually. Oh God. Yeah.
Talk about saving the turtles.
Yep.
There you go.
All right.
Now you know where that comes from.
You know my daughter better than I do. So speaking of the deep dive, I wanted to talk a little bit about, because our audience is digital marketers, small businesses, marketing directors, and they're going to be curious as to, okay, great. So we know that these people have a short attention span and they like to do deep dives. Can you talk a little bit about, because another stat that stood out to me was that Gen Z will view 62% more pages while browsing a website than any other demographic. And I thought that was fascinating. And I think this is a good opportunity to really spell it out for this audience, why it's so important to really take your website and your social media presence and all those things very seriously, because these people are doing deep dives. So I'll talk.
Yeah, they're also, in addition to doing the deep dives, they are really specific and discerning content curators.
Right.
And what I mean by that is that they're constantly aggregating information and grouping it for themselves to understand. Like they are just natural aggregators of information. And one way that they do this aggregation is that they know exactly where to look, like on different platforms, where to look for different types of content.
Right.
So if your content is, I see people in marketing making this mistake all the time for this audience where they're like, oh, I'm gonna, I've got a Buffer account or a Hootsuite account, so I'm just gonna blast this out to all the same message to all of my social media channels and not tailor it to the different channels. And that is the kiss of death for this generation, because they are really discerning when it comes to what to look for where. And I can kind of run down all the different social media channels. So on Instagram, they're looking for random inspiration, whereas on Pinterest, they would be looking for kind of more specific inspiration. Right. So if they're like, oh, I'm into cake decorating, I'm going to look for that on Pinterest. I wouldn't go to Instagram for that. I would just want to scroll and be inspired.
Right.
On Instagram, it's a little bit different. And then on Twitter, it's for news or professional announcements.
Okay.
And by professional announcements, they mean like a YouTuber saying, oh yeah, I'm going to be here at this time, or I'm doing this live event or something like that. Right. And then Google, really funny is, and we found this while we were doing the studies for Google, Google is for homework or for very specific facts. So whereas we would say, because we're a little bit older, we would say something like, oh, what do I want to know? And you'd go to Google and you'd search for it, and maybe you'd go down a rabbit hole or you'd go find some videos or whatever. They're not doing that. They're Googling something to find some specific fact and then getting out of there as fast as possible.
Oh, okay.
So they love answer boxes and all those,
the snippets,
snippets where things come up and they don't even have to dive in and dig into a web page, which is fascinating for this generation. But different than that though, where they spend all their time is YouTube. They'll go to YouTube and they'll spend a tremendous amount of time. We're talking 3+ hours a day on YouTube on average. And that was an average pre-COVID. I can't even imagine what they're doing now in terms of the time that they're on YouTube every day. Right. But that's more for DIY or how to, and they will just watch it on autoplay ad nauseum.
I've seen that. Yeah.
Then TikTok has just gone crazy this year and exploded in popularity. TikTok is more for just fun, addictive, short videos, lots of trending songs, trending sounds. Originally, I think these young people started using TikTok as a way to join a platform that their parents weren't on. It was kind of like what Snapchat was 6 or 7 years ago.
Right.
So I think that's how TikTok emerged, but now it's really taken off. And of course, their parents are getting on it now too. So I don't know how long that'll last.
Parents ruin everything, man.
Yeah. And then Snapchat is for sending funny little videos to their friends. I'd like to see the stats on how TikTok has affected Snapchat now.
I was wondering the same thing.
It's dropped a lot.
Yeah.
But that's for like random funny videos and stuff like that they can send to your friends, whereas text message is for more urgent things. So that's for more like, oh, when are we meeting? What's the answer to homework question number 4? Like things that they need an answer to quickly, it would be text message. And when we talk about text message, I really mean iMessage, because having a blue bubble is what all the kids need right now. 84% of them have iPhones. And if you are a green bubble, oh my gosh, you are a social pariah in this generation's version of Mean Girls. It's really something. The kids with Android phones are bullied at school, and it's a whole nother level that we could have a whole conversation.
My heart. And I love Android, but
And then Facebook, it's sweet, really. It's for parents. For communicating with their parents. Occasionally you'll find a kid who is into a group, who uses it for a Facebook group because he or she is into some sort of hobby or interest that older people like, like I'm really into renovating, like fixing up old cars or something like that. They might find a Facebook group for that.
And then what do they?
And
So
then
what do
I
they
didn't
do?
mention LinkedIn because they're
Yeah, yeah,
not on LinkedIn. Like
right.
they all have accounts. They are required by schools to make accounts, and they never use them. They feel totally intimidated by them. And I'm actually
Yeah.
publishing, and I'll be publishing an article hopefully next week with AJ Wilcox. We wrote an article. We did some research
Okay.
together and wrote an article on. He runs a LinkedIn agency, ad agency, and we did some research together on
Right.
why Gen Zs aren't using LinkedIn, and we really found that LinkedIn is failing them. They feel completely insecure when they go
Yeah.
to LinkedIn and they see all these older people with huge resumes and all this experience. And what's their experience? Like some babysitting or
Yeah.
a camp counselor for a summer or working in a GameStop. I mean, it really pales in comparison, and they feel so inadequate that they are not on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn's gonna have a problem if they
Yeah.
can't get them to enjoy being on the platform.
Absolutely. And then what about websites? What are they doing in terms of like browsing through a website?
Yeah,
And
if they're shopping, especially if they're on Amazon or if they're on a site and they're shopping for something, they are definitely looking for reviews.
okay.
So whereas millennials will read all the 5-star and all the 1-star and nothing in between,
Right.
Gen Z will read everything,
Everyone.
every single one.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. And actually there was I read a case study about I don't remember if it wasn't Vail, but it was one of the other Colorado ski resorts.
Yeah.
They actually encouraged more Gen Zs to come to their ski resort by giving themselves 1- and 2-star reviews and saying, this mountain it's too advanced for me. Like it's too, what a strategy, right?
Wow.
It's just because they knew that they would be reading all of them, and they wanted only a niche audience who really likes skiing in difficult terrain. I am not a skier, so I don't know.
No, you're fine.
But it was really fascinating to watch them get people to give themselves 1- and 2-star reviews specifically so that the Gen Zs who were reading those reviews would come to the resort more. And it worked. After they did that, they saw an incredible increase in that age demographic coming to their mountain.
I mean, resorts, that's a fantastic age demographic for them. I mean, that's when you're skiing the most is
right before your knees are blown and
yeah, exactly.
you're old,
exactly.
I guess.
So I wanted to switch gears a little bit and I think you said millennials were obsessed with coupons, but Gen Z is really more.
They do pay attention to sales and promotions, right, but they're more concerned with the content and how personalized it is to them. They feel what's interesting is that
I mean, that's fascinating to me.
Appreciate personalization. They certainly like it, but they don't expect it. Gen Zs expect personalization. Like it's no longer a nice to have.
Right.
So if your website is not tailored based on, an IP address or where they're logging in from or whatever thing that you're doing in terms of what products you're showing them, if you're an e-commerce site or whatever it is, if it's not tailored, they're probably not going to stay.
That's crazy.
They feel like it's lazy of the company not to do that.
That's nuts. Wow. Yeah.
But that's what they've been exposed to from a very early age. So it makes sense. Well, I think if you're thinking about the one difference between millennials and Gen Z, the one thing that keeps coming back is that the question in their minds has shifted in terms of what they're looking for. So millennials will say things like, oh, what do I want to know today? And they'll go and they'll look for it, whether it's on Google or social media or whatever. They'll go and they'll look for it and they'll find stuff out about it and learn. But Gen Zs, they don't say, what do I want to know? They say, what should I want to know? And they're relying increasingly on related items, the content creators they follow. They're relying on influencers, people that come up in their feed, autoplay on YouTube. They're relying on that much more so than they are just organically going on Google and searching for something and learning about it. But when they do start their deep dive, they will look at way more websites and way more articles and everything.
And that's such a shift. And it, the funny thing is that it really does play in with what a lot of, UX practitioners have been saying, and a lot of even, some content marketing and SEO practitioners have been saying about, personalizing the experience. So that's fascinating.
I mean, I started my career in UX 15 years ago, well, before it was called UX, like when we still said usability.
Right.
And even 10 to 15 years ago, we were saying, wow, we should personalize things.
Yeah. Makes a difference. So I have one last question for you, and this is a special question because it's from a buddy of mine. His name is Cory Wilson, and he is a partner at Live Frederick, Sell Frederick. And Cory is actually, it is his birthday today. So,
happy birthday, Cory.
So thank you for that. I appreciate that. So I'm going to read his question verbatim, and he'll be tickled because he absolutely loved your book. So his question is, how do you feel the current environment, COVID, will affect Gen Z's decision-making moving forward, seeing their parents' loss of jobs, mortgage forbearance, and so on and so on?
So these are post 9/11 kids. So they grew up in a time of, war and recession. So they already experienced that. They were already risk averse to begin with. They were fiscally conservative to begin with. They save a lot more money than millennials from the start. I think this is just validating what they already held to be true, and it's kind of that confirmation bias. See, I knew this was going to happen, and then the world flies into economy. Yes, I'm glad I saved. So I think that it's going to make them increasingly conservative. Now, I said fiscally conservative, but I did not say cheap. This generation is not cheap.
There's definitely a difference.
If they believe that there's value and you're offering good value for the money, they absolutely will pay for it. And they'll pay big amounts for something that they find on value. But I think that because of this environment, because they're even more risk averse now and a little bit more fiscally conservative, your brand and your products, they have to be on point. Like your hooks have to really be on point. You really have to know your customer inside and out before you start writing your hooks, because if they're not right, they're going to scroll right by. They are just pros at scrolling right by. They're absolutely, if it doesn't stand, if the graphics don't stand out, if the personalization is not there, if the hook is not just so like exactly tapping into their pain point, if it's not doing that, it's just, you're done.
And the great thing about this is that it's all really validation of what a lot of my favorite marketers and practitioners have been talking about for years is the idea of value and quality and personalization. Those things have been preached about for years, and I think this generation might be the one to shake people awake and say, okay, it's time to wake up and actually pay attention to this stuff, because it really it will matter more and more the older this generation gets.
If you are doing marketing right now at this time in COVID, which you should not be pausing right now, but you should be marketing right now. But when you are doing that, if you are going after this audience, there's a couple of key pain points that they are feeling right now. Okay, I'm going to list them out. There's a couple of big ones. So the first one is they are heartbroken that they are missing out on what they feel like are once in a lifetime opportunities for them. So prom, graduation, being in college and socializing in some normal way, right? So they are just completely heartbroken about that. And if you can tap into that pain point and really, solve something for them, that's that's going to resonate right now. They're just in this period of grieving. It's a huge sense of loss. And then they also worry that they're going to be behind, like a year behind, because they're so money focused and career focused and driven. There's this sense that oh my God, I'm going to be a year behind because everything in the world has stopped for a year. So they're really concerned about that right now. And then they're also really concerned, which is interesting because we haven't seen this to date. They're really concerned with how companies are responding during COVID.
Okay.
So to date, they have talked a big game when it comes to social issues, but we haven't seen them take action in terms of sacrificing, a lower paying job to do something they love, or we haven't seen that as much as millennials. And it's because they have been so fiscally conservative and focused on their careers. And we're seeing, an uptick in STEM majors and universities across the country and things like that. We haven't really seen the sacrifice to support a social good. And then COVID happened, and companies that are not responding by doing some social good, or by, offering, something free to first responders and to healthcare professionals, or whatever it is that companies are doing. If they're not doing that, they are being highly criticized. So for example, there are a couple companies right now that have actually raised prices in COVID because demand is higher, and they have just been getting panned by this generation on social media. And it's a bad move. If
really
you're one of those companies that's like, hey, I'm getting a lot more people to buy stuff, let me raise prices right now. A bad move. And then what's worse is the companies that, I don't know if it's worse, but what's equally as bad is the companies that aren't responding at all. And they're just going on like business as normal, not even a message on their website. I mean, that's pretty, I get that everyone's in this like, oh my God, what's happening? I'm panicking, and there's this wait and see mode, but we're past that at this point. You should be responding in some way. We've been in quarantine for 10, 11 weeks. We're past the grieving point, and we need to move on. And
Well, I could talk to you all day about this. I think it's just absolutely fascinating, but we are at the end of our interview. So I just wanted to say thank you so much again for writing this book. Pick it up, please. It's called Instabrain. It's a great book. And
I will say your listeners here, you can get a free chapter if you want to by going to sarahweise.com and putting your email in there, and you can get a free chapter of the book if you'd like that.
Just buy the book.
Okay. Perfect.
It's worth it.
It's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon.
This is what it looks like.
That's what it looks like. I'll put a link down below. And now, again, thank you so much for doing this interview. I really appreciate it. There's a ton here. And that's it. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.